This video is brought to you by Gigabyte's Aorus gaming laptops, such as the fantastic Aorus 17G. Throughout the Black Friday period, Gigabyte are offering Australian customers up to $1,000 discounts on new Aorus and Aero models with Nvidia graphics, making them even better buys for gamers and content creators on the go. On top of that, select customers will be eligible for neat bonuses like free SSDs, Netflix gift cards, and even a lucky draw raffle for one of 3 Gigabyte gaming monitors. There's no better time to buy an Aorus 17G or other Gigabyte laptop, so check out the links in the description to learn more.
Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It's another one of these sort of random Q&A/discussion type videos with Tim and myself, where we talk about a new hardware release, and on the menu today is RDNA2, so obviously the Radeon RX 6800 and 6800 XT. We have plenty of questions and plenty of things to discuss, so yeah, I think we should probably just get right into it.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying doing these actually with the last couple of releases. I think a lot of you guys have been enjoying sort of the longer form videos. Who knows how long this one's going to take, because we've got so many questions from our Discord community on this particular release. There's lots of interesting stuff. So yeah, well, let's kick it off with the first question.
All right, question. What do you think will be the bigger driver of sales for this Radeon launch? So AMD's mindshare through Zen 3 or Nvidia's poor launch of the 30 series? Pretty interesting question. We've sort of touched on this before. What's the bigger driver though for sales? Well, we sort of have to assume good availability at some point in the near future for there to be good sales. So what would drive those sales? It's really hard to say, because obviously Zen 3 being a huge hit now, kind of the number one choice, or really is the number one choice for gamers, pretty much anyone buying a CPU at this point. They've got something for everyone. So I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that Zen 3 is the go-to now. Or Nvidia created a lot of hype, a lot of demand, and they were woefully unprepared, or whatever the situation may be, but they were not able to meet that demand and still have not been able to meet that demand. We're still hearing that day one orders haven't been fulfilled. So people looking at 3080 level of performance now have some sort of option from AMD, or we hope they will if availability picks up. So I don't know, what do you reckon, Tim? What do you think out of those two things?
Again, it's such a hard question because of the availability issues that AMD's having. I mean, this would be... I'd swing more towards the poor launch if, AMD had got their act together with supply. So if we could sort of say,
exactly.
There's no Nvidia cards, AMD's executed on availability, so that's going to be a big driver of sales. But that kind of hasn't happened, and we're sort of in that situation where both brands are facing the same issues. So I think probably AMD's mindshare through Zen 3. I don't think it's necessarily having the CPUs being what they are. It's just more about AMD, I guess, fixing their brand sort of perception. A lot of people used to think of AMD as sort of the cheapo budget sort of, if you're poor you get AMD, if you're rich you get Intel and Nvidia sort of thing that's happened throughout the years. I think with Zen, and especially Zen 2 and Zen 3, AMD's been able to reverse that on the CPU side, and that's going to have flow-on effects for the GPU side, particularly if they can execute a high-end product, which it looks like they've been able to actually make a high-end product. So that's going to help them massively, being able to remove that sort of perception of being the cheap, budget, crappy option. Now that they've got, really high-quality CPU line, Radeon's coming to the table more than they have previously. I think that's going to help them a lot. But yeah, they kind of missed a trick there with the availability. That was wide open for them for the taking. Like, Nvidia couldn't have handed them a better situation for them to launch in, and they kind of fumbled it, didn't they?
Well, yes and no. We'll definitely talk about this more. I don't want to get into it now because there's some other questions that are directly targeting this topic a bit more. But yeah, in a way they did, but also this isn't that unusual. But as I said, we'll get into that in a moment. I don't want to sort of answer all the questions in this one question, because that's what we'd end up doing, because one thing leads to another. But I'm going to pick Nvidia's poor launch of the 30 series, which by poor launch we mean poor availability. The cards themselves are very impressive, you just can't buy one. So I think they created a huge amount of hype there. People preemptively sold 2080 Ti's and whatever they might have had, waiting for the next, big powerful GPU, couldn't get it, and I think those people would be more than willing to buy a 6800 XT if the availability was there, and maybe it will be shortly. So anyway, but I don't think there's really a wrong answer there. There's certainly, you could make arguments for either one. All right, next one here. How long do you expect it to take for optimizations to be released for ray tracing in RTX-based titles such as Minecraft? What do you reckon, Tim?
I think you can split this into two categories of games. I think there's going to be a section of games where there will never be optimizations. So I think these are the ones where they're more heavily NVIDIA sponsored. So I would expect your sort of Battlefield 5, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Metro Exodus, Control sort of games probably won't receive too many optimizations. I think Minecraft probably falls into the other category where I'd be surprised if Microsoft didn't optimize that game for AMD hardware. And on that front, it's probably going to be when we see like an Xbox Series X version of Minecraft with ray tracing that we'll see optimizations in those sort of titles. So potentially that will be the situation with Cyberpunk as well, the upcoming game, where it'll probably be optimized for NVIDIA at launch, and then maybe in the future, again, it's an NVIDIA optimized title, so it's hard to say, but potentially when they release their next gen console version, which I believe is coming early next year, not at launch, potentially then we'll see more AMD related ray tracing optimizations. But yeah, because there are so many games that are sort of, there's been that collaboration between the developers and NVIDIA specifically, I would highly doubt that a lot of those titles will get backwards support. I mean, a game like Battlefield 5 hasn't even been updated with DLSS 2.0. So if they're not even updating a game for NVIDIA's own better quality DLSS, I'd be extremely surprised if they came in and fixed it for AMD ray tracing. So do you have any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. I think you've summarized it pretty well. I think we're both of the same mindset that it's probably going to be a situation for this generation where NVIDIA does have the superior ray tracing performance.
Yeah.
Again, it's very early to call it. We'll have to see what games do 6-12 months down the track. But it seems like NVIDIA, as I said in my review, has a more mature ray tracing implementation, more mature hardware support. So they're probably going to fare a little bit better there. And yeah, therefore optimizations can help, but we still expect the GeForce cards to remain in the lead with ray tracing enabled. That's our expectation. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see what happens.
I mean, they've had 2 years. It's like 2 years is a significant lead, and yeah, it's great that AMD has ray tracing now, but that's always going to bring them an advantage at some point, and you know, it's more likely that advantage is going to be happening at the moment.
All right, next one here. Is the RX 6800 really worth $80 over the new RTX 3070 for people who game at high refresh, 1440p, and don't max out textures, assuming both cards at MSRP? Yeah, interesting one. I think we talked about this a bit after I created my review, and you were of the mindset that the $80 premium makes it a bit more of a tough sell, and AMD really should have targeted that $500 price point. That's what you were thinking, Tim, I think. Is that right? Have I got that right?
I think it's the case with both GPUs that I'd like to see them a bit cheaper to be more competitive.
Yeah.
I think the RX 6800 is the more competitive product at its price than the 6800 XT, which I think probably needed to be a little bit cheaper. But the 6800, yeah, $80, it really depends, what you're going to do with it.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if we look at sort of the average performance across all the big name review outlets, we were certainly on the higher side of the gains over the 3070 because of the games tested and maybe the amount of games. A few other things I want to look into there, but we'll save that for a separate video. But on average, if you take into account, the worst reviews for the 6800 and the best ones, the average comes to, I think it's about a 7 or 8% performance advantage for the 6800 over the 3070, and it's about 16% more expensive. So in terms of cost per frame, no matter which way you slice it, they are fairly similar. But with the 6800, you get the extra VRAM buffer, but here we're talking about that not being an advantage, because if you do run out of VRAM, just don't max out the textures. So yeah, it's still a tough one. It's hard to answer because really the whole VRAM thing aside, in terms of price to performance, they are very similar. And if you're going for high refresh rate 1440p, it's like, do you want to pay a bit more for a bit more performance? It's really a tough one. It's a similar situation with the 6800 XT and 3080, though if you game at 4K, I think the 3080 is a bit more of an obvious choice there. But Yeah, without the VRAM advantage, it's not clear which one you should pick, really. I don't think there's a right or wrong option there.
I think it's the case with both of those GPUs, 6800 and 6800 XT, where AMD has quite clearly gone and looked at exactly the performance that they're getting in the games, and they've put the price at exactly the same price to performance ratio. Like, that's been their entire goal. And I think we're probably going to get further questions about whether that was the right move for them, given the other features on offer in the entire AMD ecosystem versus NVIDIA. We've just been talking about like ray tracing performance as one element, but there's other things as well. And yeah, like I was saying sort of at the start of this question, I think that they probably needed to price it a bit cheaper. I mean, for this question, like, is it really worth $80? I mean, if it was, is it really worth $20 or $30? Like, that equation changes significantly. And if it was a $520 card, I'd be like, yeah, go for it, get it. It's faster, it's got more VRAM. That's like a slam dunk win. But when AMD sort of got and taken all their performance numbers and priced it where they have, I get what they're doing, you know, like there's not going to be much stock at launch. They're trying to capitalize on the insane demand for these GPUs at the moment. But yeah, I think the pricing is, especially 6 months from now, is going to be very interesting to see where the opinions lie once these cards are much more widely available.
Absolutely. And I think the reason why we're seeing differing opinions amongst reviewers on the sort of the 6800 versus the 3070 battle is because you can look at it a few different ways, and depending on which way you look at it, the conclusion is a bit different. So if you're looking purely at a price to performance, a cost per frame type thing, it's like, yeah, it's on par with the 3070, roughly the same. You know, here's the cons and pros of this one, here's the cons and pros of that one, depending on how you weigh them up, one may be better than the other, or more suited for you. There's also the expectation way of looking at it, the fact that AMD is so competitive, where the rumors were suggesting they would be, but how many times in recent history have the rumors for a Vega 64 product or a Radeon 7 product, you know, the rumors have suggested they'll be very competitive, and then in reality, they've been products that we have not recommended. Like, we've strongly recommended. In the case of Vega, we said get a GTX 1080. In the case of the Radeon 7, we said get an RTX 2080. So we haven't been recommending AMD GPUs in most price categories for a long time. It's just the way it's been. And to have the 6800 be something that you really can recommend, if you look at it from that way, it's quite impressive. And then I guess the third way of looking at it is, I imagine this is sort of how you're trending, Tim, is that because they don't have the mature ray tracing support, because the encoder is questionable compared to what NVIDIA are offering, and a few other features that you polled recently, they really shouldn't be trying to match NVIDIA in terms of cost per frame and doing a sort of a classic AMD thing and offering a better value product. Similar performance at a discounted price, that'll make them a lot more compelling. And I think maybe that's why a few reviewers were disappointed to see them charging a premium over the 3070 in this example, rather than matching it on price. Because had they matched it at that price point, I think the 6800 would have been the obvious product to buy. Of course, there are other reasons why they haven't done things like that, because it seems like they're selling everything they can produce, and probably for the next few months, everything they can produce will be sold instantly. So there's very little incentive for them not to charge the extra $80 US.
Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of stuff going on with this launch that makes these things very questionable, and yeah, who knows what's going to happen in the future. But I agree. I think we were talking, just, get on a call a couple of days after the reviews to just sort of chat it out, as we usually do with these sorts of things, see what other reviewers have been saying. And I think one of the comments that I made at the time was that if AMD brings a GPU battle to the features side, so they match price to performance, or they just have the same performance at the exact same price, they're never going to win that features battle. Like, at the moment, it's just not possible for them to win. Even if they had equal ray tracing performance, NVIDIA still has elements like DLSS, like their encoder, that are going to sway people more onto that front. So until AMD has those features in hand, and it seems like they are doing work on, I'm not sure on the encoder side, that's probably have to do a bit of research into that, but certainly in things like image quality, like your DLSS type features, AMD's putting in the work, but I think that they overestimate how many people just buy on price to performance, and certainly in the polls that we've seen recently, people do place a price premium on the NVIDIA features and are willing to spend a little bit more. Not everyone's willing to spend that amount of money extra on an NVIDIA card with their features, but there's enough people there that should at least be an indication to AMD that if we're taking the battle to the features perspective, we're not going to be winning that. So, yeah, I like I said, if the RX 6800 was $500 or even $520, $530, absolutely winner price. But yeah, at that sort of $80 premium, it becomes a more difficult thing, and you're going to have to do a lot more research into the exact things that you want. Because recommending these cards is very, very difficult. Just to say get that or get that, it's just not. We're not in that situation at the moment with these cards.
No, it is very difficult depending on preferences and whatnot, which is pretty much what we said in the review. And as you say, NVIDIA, they've got more brand power, more mind share, obviously more market share, and really the only way I see AMD clawing that back is to offer a product that is just obviously the better value product, which they haven't done. But then, as I said earlier, it looks like it's a situation in the short term that they're going to sell everything they can possibly produce, so there's no incentive to reduce their margins. And then maybe once the supply does start to catch up to the demand, or well and truly has, and sales start to slump, we'll see discounted prices, which is what we've seen from AMD a lot in the past. We even saw it with the 5700 series. So that could be something we see there. Yeah. Again, we'll have to wait and see. We've got a lot of things have to be worked out before we get that far, basically.
Yeah, another thing that I'm seeing a lot in sort of comments and sentiment from people is obviously the driver thing as well. Even though it's not really a feature, like drivers, generally speaking, when they work, they just work. But quite clearly, the 5700 XT saga with the driver issues has caused AMD, I don't know what the right word to use is, but definitely some level of negative coverage for them. Like that did not work in their favor very well, and people have a negative opinion of AMD's drivers, and it's probably been for quite some years now that opinion has been the case, and people do seem to be more willing to, if two products are the same price to performance ratio, then a feature like drivers is going to become even more of a consideration, and AMD sort of completely screwing the ball on the 5700 series has caused them damage now for this series where performance is much more competitive.
They'll take some pain for a while on that, and it was a bit of a double whammy as well, because people hearing the mass reports of black screen issues and various driver problems, that was not only putting off potential buyers, but then people who basically committed to buying an AMD product. They said, we're buying AMD because it's either better value or whatever, or we're going to put trust in the brand. And then they got burnt, and a lot of them said, I sold my 5700 XT or got rid of it or got my money back, whatever the situation was, and spent more to get a 2070 Super. And that's terribly damaging to AMD having that sort of situation, because they're trying to claw back some kind of market share, and to actually win people over and then push them to the other side, it's not good. So they obviously, we've covered all this. It seems like they made great strides in solving that. I haven't had any driver problems with the new 6800 series, though there is an issue that there is a question that asks about driver stuff. We'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, a few things I discovered today during some further testing. But anyway, is that all on this one?
Yeah, I think that's probably it. I mean, it's the price to performance question. There's just so many different angles to cover at the moment on this one. I think that it's an interesting one. I've just thought of this right now to continue this question even further than we've been talking about. But I think we've said in the past that AMD really did need a product that competes at the high end on not just performance, but also on price, to give them that premium look for their products. Like, you don't want to be just topping out your $400 cards when NVIDIA's got $1,000 plus GPUs. They need to have a card in that price range so that they appear to be competing at the high end, even if the product is maybe not the best value buy in that region. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with mid-range GPUs, because will they do this price to performance thing again with something like a 6700 series or 6600 series? That's not a great name for a product, but I assume they'll be doing something like that. It'll be interesting to see whether they go with more the 5700 thing again and price it $100 less in terms of, same performance, or what's going to happen there, because There's lots of battles that AMD are facing right now. It's not just performance. It's not just value. It's we need to get more market share. We need to reverse the damage we did with the drivers. We need to get people on board in so many different regions that this is a multi-year battle for Radeon, and it's good to see that they've taken a positive step and we're not just another Vega or another Fury or another Radeon 7. But this isn't going to be one with this generation. It's going to take... Yeah, it's like a Zen 1 or a Zen 2. It needs a Zen 3.
Yeah, that's right. It's step one of proving themselves, basically.
Let's move on, though. Let's get to another question finally. We've probably been speaking about this for 20 minutes.
Well, that's not my fault this time. I can blame it on you.
All right, next question. Hopefully this one is a lot easier and simpler to answer. Do you think a 650-watt PSU will be enough for the RX 6800 XT? Mine is gold certified, 90% efficiency. Planning to pair with an Ryzen 5 5600X.
Yeah, that'll be perfectly fine. I'd recommend an efficient 650-watt power supply as the minimum, regardless of the CPU. We're using a 3950X in our test system. I think total system draw was just shy of 500 watts, so 650 will give you the necessary headroom there, and that would seem like a good combination, I think. Between 650 and say 850 would be a suitable range for a power supply. So, but you'll have no problems there.
Right. Next question: do you think RX 6800 will be overclockable to the extent like the 5600 XT with unlocked BIOS for performance over 5700 stock, so it can get near the performance of the RX 6800 XT? What do you reckon?
No idea, because I don't know. We have AIB 6800 graphics cards. Actually, I think that might be 6800 XTs. I'm not sure how many 6800s we were sent. But anyway, we've got AIB cards incoming. I'm not exactly sure when they'll arrive. Obviously, the deadline is the 25th. I'm not sure we'll have anything on that date because just postage at the moment is very slow. But they've been rumoured to have higher power targets and things like that, so they're better for overclocking. Certainly better than what we saw on the reference card. That's what I'm told. But I don't know if that's true yet, because we haven't got one in hand, so I can't really elaborate too much more on that one.
Next question is, other AIBs have altered VRAM size and frequency for other video cards. Their motherboard layouts can change wildly. Is that 128MB cache also possibly in flux for the 6800 or 6800 XT or other models in this lineup? Could the 6500 XT have, say, 64 megabytes of infinity cache? I think there's a few misconceptions in this question. When other AIBs produce cards of different VRAM sizes, that's all sanctioned by the, head level, I don't know what you'd call it, like the AMD or NVIDIA, basically. So when you see like an GTX 1060 6GB and 3GB models, both of those are officially sanctioned SKUs by NVIDIA. So if we saw a lower VRAM capacity model of a 6800 or 6800 XT, that's not going to be on the AIBs. That's going to be AMD saying, yeah, you can produce this card with that VRAM capacity. Where it gets more complicated is the 128MB cache is actually part of the die. So unless AMD is allowing AIBs to sell like a cut down version of the die that's basically the same but has like part of that cache disabled, I very much doubt that would be happening, because it's just an integral part of the die and integral to the performance overall. They've used infinity cache to offset some of the lower memory bandwidth that they're producing on these cards. So maybe with the 6500 XT and cards like that have a different die, I would very much expect them to have less infinity cache. But for a 6800 or 6800 XT product, I would expect the cache to be still 128MB on all those cards. Maybe we'll get a lower VRAM card, but I doubt it, considering that's a big selling point of these models. And that's all going to have to be, AMD is going to have to come in and say that's allowed for any of the AIBs to do something like that. Yep,
100%. Yeah, that is a common misconception with GPUs and VRAM capacity or even memory type. I remember when we exposed the GeForce, the GT 1030?
Yep.
And a lot of people attacked us in the comment section saying that this isn't an NVIDIA thing, it's actually on the AIBs. It's the AIBs are being dodgy and putting DDR4 memory on them instead of GDDR memory, which certainly is not the case. If anyone went and did that, they would be expelled from the NVIDIA program, basically. They would have their allocation cut.
Yep.
So any VRAM sizes or types, that is all, as you said, sanctioned by NVIDIA. And in a lot of times, they will be forcing AIBs to offer those particular models.
Yeah.
So it's all controlled by them.
Isn't it a situation as well where often it's not NVIDIA just selling the GPU die or the GPU package to an AIB, but they also can bundle it with the memory that's required. So when an AIB is, say, producing an RTX 3070, they're not just buying the die, they're buying the die and the 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory and potentially other components as well to put on their board. So while the AIB is designing, their power stages and their board layouts and things that they want within the NVIDIA specifications, of course, a lot of the time those components are actually sourced for them by NVIDIA, particularly with the key components. They don't want an AIB to be sourcing like dodgy GDDR6 memory that NVIDIA hasn't validated to work with their die. They want to make sure that all that is functional and works well, so that they're not tarnishing the brand by having worse performing 3070s or something like that. So there's a lot of very tight control over these cards, even though the AIBs can still do a bit with the power stages, with their coolers and all that sort of thing, but there's still a significant amount of that board that is still controlled by NVIDIA or AMD for these sort of things. All right, so this next one it's related to ray tracing. I think we've seen a few comments like this come up from time to time, so it's worth talking about. This is sort of another play on question here, but do you expect titles not specifically coded for RTX versus DXR ray tracing to have significantly better performance like we've seen in Dirt 5? I expect the ray tracing to get better optimized as developers use it, but I guess I'm more asking to what extent we'll see an improvement, as the other question asks how long. So, again, there's so much to play out here because we really don't know, but I would expect that for future titles that aren't just RTX, that we will see them perform better, but to the extent of Dirt 5 is really up in the air, because Dirt 5 is sort of a game that uses ray trace shadows. We really don't know at this stage what the situation will be like for, say, a game with reflections, or a game that's more fully path traced along the lines of like a Minecraft or Quake. We don't know what will happen when we get multiple effects in it. So I don't think we can really extrapolate from the Dirt 5 results too much, because it's just one example. If we had like 5 Dirt 5s that we could talk about right now, like an AMD equivalent of like a Watch Dogs Legion or a game like that, or a Control that we could point to and say, yeah, Control runs poorly on AMD, but a similar game is running much better that's more optimized, then we'd have a lot more insight into this. But I think generally speaking, we could expect that there will be more optimization for games in the future. And I'm basing this, I guess, on sort of what we saw with like a Battlefield 5, where initially performance came out on NVIDIA GPUs and it wasn't very good, and then over time they were able to improve performance on those GPUs to some extent. Obviously there is a limit to how much actual ray tracing these cards can do, so we're not going to see magical improvements. But we're at the point now where it's possible that we are testing a game like Control with ray tracing before the developers have actually tested it on these GPUs, because they simply haven't had access. So I would expect future titles to perform better. There's just so much to play out there, isn't there? And it's basically just guessing the future. But ultimately, there's only so much ray tracing the cards can do, and we're going to have to figure out what the cards are capable of over time, and we're just not able to do that right now.
Yep, totally agree. Basically, all we can promise you is we will continue to test these new titles as they come out, but that's really all we can do.
Yeah, and I've spoken to a few people. So I wanted recently to get a better understanding of how ray tracing works, because I really didn't have much of an idea. I'm not going to go into any specifics here because I'll probably get stuff wrong. You're better going to experts to read about how these ray tracing implementations work. But I guess the thing I'm hearing from multiple people is that the way NVIDIA and AMD have implemented ray tracing into their GPUs is very different. Obviously, we know that NVIDIA is using a dedicated ray tracing core design. In AMD's design, it's built more into the existing, I don't know what you call it, like the existing GPU design. So they're using part of the TMUs to do ray tracing, and that is causing a lot of these situations, or at least that's the expectation, is that those wildly different designs are causing the situation we're seeing now, where a game like Dirt 5 might perform better, whereas a game like Shadow of the Tomb Raider performs a lot worse, because it's just a developer has gone, okay, well, NVIDIA's got these ray tracing cores, so we're going to design all of our ray tracing around that and work to the strengths of that design, the things that NVIDIA's really good at accelerating. And it sounds like AMD's design is better at accelerating a different set of things. So as we've been talking about, and I think people are really jumping to conclusions with the ray tracing performance of these cards, going like, what we're seeing in like a Shadow of the Tomb Raider or Control or Minecraft, that's where we're at. That's permanently the level of these cards for ray tracing. But by the sounds of it, the differences in these designs is so significant that it really is going to take developers some time to dig through these games and figure out how they can make it work better on AMD GPUs. And who knows, maybe we'll see like two different implementations in not necessarily sponsored titles, but more like maybe like a Red Dead Redemption or a flight simulator that tends to work, it's not sponsored one way or another. Potentially we will see like, hey, we've got an NVIDIA GPU, we're going to do this for ray tracing. We've got an AMD GPU, we'll do this for ray tracing because of the designs and to better optimize it for the hardware that they've got. So yeah, like we've been saying a lot, and I guess we've copped a bit of flack for the ray tracing stuff, but I think that it's just way too early to make a call one way or another on what these cards are going to look like 2 years down the track. And I wouldn't be drawing anything from Dirt 5. I wouldn't be drawing anything from Control. We just need to wait and see that all play out. All right, Steve, got one for you. Considering you've been testing these cards, what do you think about driver stability for AMD? Where are we at the moment?
Well, probably my insight here doesn't mean anything because we had, you and I both had great driver stability with the 5700 XT.
Yep.
I won't get into any stories with that because we've covered that, but basically I had no problems with the 5700 XT. I've actually had more stability issues with the Ampere GPUs, even with the latest driver, than what I ever had with my 5700 XT. So
yep.
Take that for but let's not get sidetracked by that. So basically no driver issues at this point in time. However, I have been putting together somewhere between a 30 and 40 game benchmark between the RTX 3070 and the RX 6800. And I discovered it this morning, and it seems to have been confirmed by a few people on Reddit, that the performance of the RDNA2 GPUs in CryEngine games is not good. Like much lower than it should be, basically. Kingdom Come Deliverance is a game that I am testing with, and whereas we're getting 100 and something frames per second, like maybe 120 FPS, somewhere around there with the 3070, I'm only getting 60 FPS with the 6800.
Ooh,
and normally the 6800 is faster. Yeah. So as the resolution climbs up, that margin closes, and by the time they get to 4K, they're both delivering the exact same 54 FPS on average in my test. I'm not sure what it is that's limiting performance of the 6800 so heavily at 1440p and 1080p. Not sure what's going on there.
Sounds like a bug or some issue there. That
seems unlikely. It happens in Crysis Remastered as well. There was somebody on Reddit put together a thread. He tested, I think, 3 or 4 different CryEngine games and all saw the sort of 60 FPS cap at best or worst performance in more demanding areas, dropping down to even 40 FPS. Yeah, not sure what's going on there, but it is some sort of bug with the CryEngine games because that's all it can be. There's not something there that is the kryptonite of the RDNA2 architecture, let's say. There's just a bug. But that's really the only issue I've come into. It's not a stability issue. The game still it runs fine in the sense that it doesn't crash. It's just the performance, the FPS, isn't where you'd expect it to be. So other than that, though, I've not run into any issues yet, but I've only tested about, I think, 25 of the 30-something games I intend on testing, so maybe some other weird performance-related issue will crop up. But yeah, stability seems good so far. No crashing, no black screens, none of that nonsense, so that is good. Having said that, I am only testing with a single monitor. Haven't done any multi-monitor setup testing yet.
Okay, so this next question, let's get into it. From my talks with several retailers, it looks like the reference models are solely made and sold by AMD themselves. Unlike most previous launches for AMD, it seems like most AIBs aren't really selling a reference model either. How likely do you think that AMD could be focusing all its supply on AIB cards instead, since they often come with better and quieter coolers compared to their reference counterparts? Could the focus and shift to AIBs mean that supply issues could be better soon?
This was something that we hinted at. What video was that? I think it was one of, I can't even...
Maybe the unboxing video, something like that.
I think it was, that's right. I think it was the unboxing video. I did a bit of asking around with retailers and AIBs, and it certainly seemed like a case where, the focus wasn't on these reference cards, and it wasn't made clear to people that although they were launching on, what was it, the 18th? Yep. It wasn't until the 25th that they were really launching.
Yeah.
So that's certainly turned out to be the situation. What we get on the 25th, well, it depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
It seems like XFX, Sapphire, Power Color, the exclusive partners have some sort of supply. I don't know what that is yet. It's unclear because I can't say too much, but it's unclear. From the people that aren't exclusive partners, it seems like they got basically nothing, and they won't be launching their custom cards till the middle of next month.
Yeah, that's right.
So it does seem like a situation where, and we've seen this before, where the reference card comes out, it is the reference design, the reference spec, and many months later it fades away and it's replaced by all the custom cards offered by the various brands, and there's really no reference cards to speak of. That mostly happened with, the 5700 series, for example. It was all reference cards to begin with, and they fade out. I'm not sure if you could even buy one 6 months down the track, or even 3 months, I'm not sure. But it is typical that they do that. They phase out the reference card, and it's served its purpose there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty standard strategy that we've seen for a while, where AMD wants to get these cards out as soon as possible, but they also want to give their AIBs as much time as possible to develop their own actually quality AIB cards that don't have issues. So they kind of do both things. They produce their own card for a short period of time. It'll probably get phased out in like early 2021 or something around that time period, so that they can get the cards out early. They can sell a limited amount of stock, but actually have it launched, have the performance out there, get people interested in it, and then they give them a couple of weeks, or in this case sounds like 1 week for AIBs to launch, and then some AIBs are going to take longer than that, but that gives them that extra little bit of time to perfect their AIB designs, and then they'll launch that, and that'll become the focus of the line from then on. Because obviously AIBs they don't want to all be selling the exact same card. There's no differentiation then. The only thing they can do is sell at a different price, which most aren't willing to do. So their focus is, obviously they're more interested in producing a custom card. They want to have the biggest, cooler, and the best performance and all that sort of thing to really get the sales that they're after. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if the supply was mostly focused on AIB cards, and obviously there'll be an allocation from AMD of, here's the reference cards that you can sell, and here's the dies or packages that they can sell for their own cards, and there's going to be differences there. But yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes in terms of the supply things there for different brands. And yeah, it could be a while until we see some brands with AIB cards, custom cards on the market, and other brands will be launching much sooner to now. But I would expect most of these cards to sell out pretty much instantly, even if there's any significant supply, just because of how in demand these things are. So yeah, I don't think that we'll suddenly see a situation on the 25th where everything's in stock. You can just rock up at your local micro center and buy one, no troubles. But hopefully there's more supply than what we've seen up to this point, where we've heard Ampere level bad for the initial launch. Hopefully it's better than that next week, but we'll just have to see. And here's another one about the reference cards. We've just been talking about them, so let's follow up with this one. Considering reference cards have traditionally been blower-style cards and partner cards have traditionally been open-air designs, why do you think AMD decided to change to an open-air design this generation? Well, it has to be because the blower cards got so much criticism and really weren't very good.
Yeah, with the higher power consumption of these models compared to something like we saw at the 5700 XT, it was going to be horrible. But yes, they've been heavily criticised, and we've really been pushing AMD to change the whole blower style design, just because it doesn't make sense. As we've just been talking about, you get the reference cards first. All the reviews are based on the reference cards. And when reviewers are constantly complaining about hot running cards, loud cards, it's just not a good look. It spoils the review from what otherwise would have been a good product. And we saw that with the 5700 series reviews a bit. AIB cards came along. You got the Power Color, Red Devils, the Sapphire Nitros, all those cards, and they were just miles better. We're talking huge reductions in operating temperature, while also running significantly quieter, just a much better package, a much better product. And that's something that's what you want to show off first. You don't want to show off a hot, loud product that performs quite well. Yeah. You want to show a cool and quiet product that performs quite well. Obviously, it's just a much better package to present. So,
and Nvidia has clearly learnt this lesson generations ago with the Turing line, and I think there still are blower cards, like especially for even 3080s and stuff like that. Nvidia, I think the Founders Edition and the reference card kind of jumble together for the consumer market because the first card that Nvidia makes is often referred to as the reference design. But from our understanding, that there is actually a reference blower design that Nvidia also has for these cards, which is sold to your OEMs like your Dells and HPs that are using 3080s for, they want a reliable, it might be loud or whatever, but they have special purposes that they need blower cards for. So they had this Founders Edition design as well. So they kind of split, they do two things basically. And that's a much better solution to this problem. If you need some OEMs having blower cards, then make a reference design for them. And then for general consumers that are putting these in their fancy cases and don't want a card that runs it like a jet engine, then you make your own, you don't necessarily need to call it a Founders Edition card or reference card, but just, the better in-house design. And I think that's what we'll see moving forward.
Yeah, presenting an OEM spec product to a do-it-yourself market is just a really terrible idea. It'd be like Intel shipping Z490 motherboards that only run at the TDP spec and don't support overclocking and things like that. It's not showing the full potential of the platform. It's not putting your best foot forward. And that's what AMD wasn't doing for the longest time with these really crappy reference cards. And that really did hurt the brand because AMD got known as the hot, loud GPU manufacturer when technically they weren't, because the AIB cards weren't hot and loud. So anyway, it's a step that a very obvious step, in my opinion, they need to take for a long time. And it's good to see that they finally have. Definitely a step in the right direction there. All right, next question here. Do you expect the 6800 and 6800 XT to age well like the 480 and 580? I do. I expect them to age quite well. We've seen this sort of situation in the past where when AMD offers much more VRAM, that typically leads to the whole FineWine thing. Whereas when they don't, not so much, though they do make improvements through drivers and whatnot. But I think a good example would be like the R9 390 versus the GTX, say 980, 970. The 980 probably because it had the 4 gigabytes of VRAM. So we're talking about 4 gigabytes of VRAM versus 8 gigabytes of VRAM. So in modern games where you're not turning down the textures, the 980 gets slayed, whereas the 390 does pretty well.
Yep.
So I think it's basically a VRAM thing there. Obviously, they've got 16 gigabytes this generation versus, well, in the case of the 3070 versus 6800, we're talking about 8 gigabytes versus 16 gigabytes and then 10 gigabytes versus 16. And sort of on that topic, a lot of people I've seen in the comment section say, why 16 gigabytes? It's so overkill. It's going to be ages before AMD's faster because games aren't going to require 16 gigabytes of VRAM for so long. So I'm seeing a lot of comments to that effect. And really, for AMD to have a big performance advantage, you don't need to be using 16 gigabytes of VRAM. You need to be using, in the case of the 3070, like 9, and in the case of the 3080, like 11. So once you get, depends on the game and how it's using and managing memory, but typically what we've seen in the benchmarks is once you get to about a gig over the VRAM buffer, there starts to be a noticeable performance hit. And then once you get beyond a gig, then all bets are off. Like you can just get mad stuttering, frame rates can tank. Again, it depends on the game. And we are talking about usage here, not allocation. So Doom, for example, with the texture pool size, it will load that up to about 9 gigabytes at 4K using the Ultra Nightmare setting. So, and that is usage. So it's using 9 gigabytes of VRAM, and that's why with 8 gigabyte cards, no matter which card we're talking about, we do see a performance hit. The more bandwidth they have, that tends to help alleviate that a little bit. But anyway, go 3-4 years down the track when we're expecting games to be regularly using more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM with the high quality textures. I think the 6800 is going to pull much further ahead of the 3070. We had a question earlier that talked about this where they were saying, if you don't care about using the highest quality textures, which would you buy? So 3 years down the track, it doesn't mean the 3070 is now useless. It just means your ultra high definition texture packs you won't be able to use.
Yeah,
so you'll use a medium or high quality texture pack or just texture setting. How much that matters, it depends on the individual. Personally, I think textures are everything, and they really massively enhance the visuals of the game. That's my opinion. I always want to run with the highest textures possible. If I'm playing a Shadow of the Tomb Raider type game, if I'm playing a Fortnite or Call of Duty or Battlefield 5 type game, probably don't care as much. If anything, it makes it harder to spot enemies, but that different subject, that one. But anyway, in short, I do expect them to age better. And do you agree with all of that, Tim?
Yeah, I think this FineWine thing that often comes up with AMD GPUs is potentially being misattributed to drivers a lot of the time. Like, I think that was more going to be the case with the DirectX 11 era, where a lot of stuff is done in the driver, and AMD over time was able to eke out a bit more performance out of their DirectX 11 drivers because they can change a lot of things in there. But now when we're sort of in the DirectX 12 era where less stuff is done in the drivers, it's going to come more down to, as we've been talking about, more hardware-related features as to how these cards age. So I wouldn't expect, for example, that, you know, in 2 years' time that there's been in a game today that doesn't require more VRAM, that suddenly we're getting 20% more performance because AMD's been able to optimize their drivers, particularly if that game is DirectX 12. I highly doubt that that's going to be the situation. However, what it is going to come down to, as you've been talking about, is VRAM and potentially other hardware features. Yeah. So it really comes down to how forward-looking are the architectures and the hardware that they're putting into the cards. So if AMD is correctly predicting into the future that 16 gigabytes of VRAM is the thing that is needed for future games, then if they make that bet and it turns out true, then you're going to see that FineWine situation versus a card that didn't make that bet. But potentially what we're going to see on NVIDIA cards is their own FineWine. So for example, maybe NVIDIA's made the bet correctly that their double FP32 processing is the way of the future. So potentially they could have guessed that pathway being right for future games. We just don't know. So potentially they could pull away because of that. Obviously, VRAM in other games is going to cause issues, so there's always going to be a toss-up. Maybe their ray tracing design. Maybe the bet that NVIDIA went for ray tracing is going to cause FineWine for them, or maybe the bet that AMD went for ray tracing is going to cause ray tracing FineWine for AMD. Who knows? But really, it's those hardware features that, just going to need to take the developers to see which direction they go. I think VRAM's a fairly safe bet, though, as opposed to double FP32 or stuff like that.
I think so as well, but it is an interesting one because obviously the focus has been a lot on VRAM, particularly at our channel. And it's interesting because if it only becomes an issue 2 years down the track, and say you're holding on to these GPUs for 3-4 years, that will affect you. But I wonder if it's almost a mistake for AMD to be putting this headroom, this future-proofing into their GPUs, rather than offer a 6800 with 8 gigabytes of VRAM and make it cheaper if they can. I don't know the exact margins that they're playing with here, but make it cheaper than a 3070, because then or even the same price, because then you get the extra performance now and they're at parity for VRAM in the future. So they're both going to tank due to VRAM, or you're going to have to make the same compromises in the future with both cards. So
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you're basically tossing up between having the same performance for, say, half the card's life, and then potentially better performance for the second half of its life. And so you're tossing up
people who buy it secondhand.
All people who buy it secondhand. So basically, you're sort of tossing up between, should it be cheaper now, and sort of you get that better situation now for half of the life, or do you want the better performance sort of in the second half of its life as opposed to the first half? So it is an interesting discussion on that one, I think, and we don't know how that's going to play out. But I think with this generation in particular, less so with, say, your R9 390 comparison. At the time that card was launched, there weren't too many games that were sort of right about to use more than 4 gigabytes of memory. It was kind of, it did take many years for games to reach that situation. Whereas I think with the 3070 and 6800 now, we're already seeing games that are on a knife's edge. Like it's not a significant step forward to say that in a year's time, these games are going to be using more than 8 gigabytes of memory, because we already have Doom Eternal and Watch Dogs Legion that are right up against that limit. Like, if you turn on ray tracing at some resolutions in Watch Dogs Legion, you need more than 8 gigabytes of memory. So
I believe Godfall's another one as well.
Yeah, so it's not a big, like, it maybe was a stretch back then, but I think now it's not a stretch to say that this will become an issue within the lifetime of the card, potentially earlier than 2 years. Especially with the consoles launching with, you know, more memory, that's another discussion entirely, but I think it's much easier with these FineWine predictions to make a call when we're seeing that sort of knife's edge situation. Like, if we can go now and say, well, there's not too many games that use, say, 10 gigabytes of memory, but we're seeing a fair few use 8 gig, so we're pretty close to the limit there. So, whereas potentially on, a, say, like an FP32, you know, double FP32 thing, it might be, oh, well, we don't really know which way that one's going to go because we don't know how much of the limit we are at the moment on that front. So, yeah, I think this is making the bet that VRAM's an issue is a pretty safe one, I'd say.
Again, but further complicating the issue is it comes down to the individual again, the games they play and their expectations. Because we had, as I said, we had a question earlier where texture, size / quality wasn't an issue. And I think not to give myself a pat on the back, but I think I nailed it in our Q&A series when we were discussing this. And I said, look, my opinion is when you're spending $500 US on a GPU, you don't want to be compromising on things like VRAM capacity. You don't want to be getting last generation mid-range VRAM buffer sizes on your new $500 card. You know, you don't want 2060 Super VRAM buffer sizes. You want to go up to at least 12 gigabytes, in my opinion. So the fact that it has 8, I personally wouldn't invest in that. I'd want a minimum of 12 gigabytes at the moment. And 16 is obviously sort of overkill. But again, it comes down to personal preference, whether you're willing to make that compromise on a $500 GPU. I think that compromise on a $300 GPU or cheaper is perfectly acceptable. For me personally, I wouldn't make it at $500, but that's up to the viewers to decide at what point do they want to start compromising on certain features like the VRAM buffer size.
All right, so that does it for what turns out will be part 1 of the Q&A, because we were originally planning on only making this one video, but we've been recording for 2 hours at this point. So we're probably going to be splitting this video into 2 parts for you, which you'll see over the coming days. So we'll have half of the questions in this one, half of the questions in the other one. You get hours of us talking about 6800 XTs, 6800s, NVIDIA stuff, ray tracing. It's been a great selection of questions from our Discord community. It's been really great to go through and discuss a bunch of this stuff. But yeah, we're not going to be putting out a 2-hour-long movie-length video for you anytime soon. So yeah, splitting this one into 2 parts. What else? What else is there to say? Subscribe.
I mean, I think we've said just about everything. Definitely subscribe if you haven't already. Give it a like if you enjoyed the conversation. If you have any other thoughts or whatever, obviously drop them in the comment section below. We will read those. Also, we have Float Plane and Patreon. If you'd like to join the Harbourbox community, you can do so at either of those locations. There are different tiers. You can sign up for things like our exclusive Discord chat for Patreon members. We do a live stream at least once every month. So Tim and myself, similar format to this. We like to do it in person. Hopefully we'll be able to do that soon. But yeah, live streams, behind the scenes videos, Q&A stuff. Anyway, it's really cool. So yeah, if you guys want to check that, as I said, the links for that stuff is in the video description. But other than that, I think we'd probably just like to give a huge thank you to the 20% Club. All the people that watched this whole video right to the end.
Yep. Big shout out on that one, because it'll be a long one.
Absolutely. And you'll have to do it all over again tomorrow. So yeah, thanks a lot, guys. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim. See you.
See you next time.
Next one.